Okay, picture this. It's the morning of August 9th, 1969. A father and son walk up to a 150 Cielo Drive, and they find the phone wires at the gate, just sniffed, cut clean through.
Right. So they call the police.
Exactly. Police arrive, probably thinking, maybe you break in, something like that.
Standard procedure, initially.
But what they walked into, well, one of the patrolmen, a veteran, later called it a human slaughterhouse. Just profoundly horrific.
It really set the tone immediately, didn't it? This wasn't just any crime scene. The level of violence, it signaled something way off, something deeply disturbing, plunged them straight into this awful mystery.
So welcome, everyone. In this session, we're doing a deep dive into a really compelling book one of our listeners sent over. It takes us right inside the investigation of those Cielo Drive murders and the ones that followed.
Yeah, it's a tough journey through the grim details, the hunt for answers, and the truly bizarre motivations behind the Manson family case that eventually surfaced.
And look, when you're dealing with information this heavy, sometimes it helps to process it differently. That's why we also have Mindful Moments. It's our YouTube channel. It uses AI book analysis to kind of help inspire reflection and critical thinking, worth checking out alongside these dives.
Definitely. So our goal today, we're going to walk you through the key details, the essential insights from this book. We want to help you understand how the investigation unfolded, the reality behind those shocking headlines.
We'll focus on the core information, stick to the timeline, follow the evidence as it was uncovered.
Okay, so back to that morning, August 9th. The father and son, the cut wires. The call goes out.
Right, and the dispatch log, it's timed at 09142 hours. Listed as a Code 2, that's possible homicide at 1050 Cielo Drive.
But like you said, the officers showing up, DeRosa, Wisenhunt, Burbridge, they had absolutely no real idea what they were about to encounter, the scale of it.
DeRosa, the veteran officer, he said later he'd seen death before. But this was something else entirely. That phrase, human slaughterhouse, it just chills you, doesn't it? Tells you everything about the depravity they saw.
And their first steps inside. Just harrowing. They found a white Rambler first, just inside the gate.
Yeah, about 30 feet in.
Then they found a woman on the lawn. Sharon Tate, they later learned.
Heartbreaking.
Inside the house, it was even worse. More bodies, blood in the hallway, and strange little details like a toy rabbit left on a headboard in one of the bedrooms, its legs just dangling.
And that detail about Officer DeRosa, deliberately touching the bloody gate button on his way out.
Yeah, I remember reading that.
When they asked him why, he just said, I had to get out of there. Just this overwhelming need to escape the horror. You can almost feel it.
Intense. By 9:40 a.m., barely half an hour after dispatch, DeRosa's reporting 5 deaths, and they already had a suspect in custody.
Identifying the victims wasn't straightforward either, was it?
No, William Tennant, a friend, was brought in. The book describes him being led through just a nightmare. He could ID Frykowski, Folger, Sharon Tate.
But Sebring was difficult.
Yeah, Jay Sebring. His face had severe contusions. It was hard to recognize him initially. The trauma was so bad for Tennant, he actually had to go outside and be sick.
Understandable. And the initial evidence at the scene, it's kind of sparse, right? Almost misleading.
Very much so. They found only 2 knives right away. One was just a regular kitchen knife, found in the sink.
Okay.
The other was a pocket knife. Now, the forensic tech, Granado, tested that kitchen knife, and it showed animal blood, not human.
Animal blood. Okay, so what did that suggest?
It suggested something pretty crucial. The killers likely brought their own weapons. The wounds were so savage, you see, that a thin kitchen knife probably would have just broken. They needed something stronger, more brutal.
So, not much physical evidence pointing outwards immediately, which meant the focus turned inwards, right, to the guy they found on the property.
Exactly. William Garretson. He was staying in the guest cottage, arrested almost immediately.
And the media jumped on that, didn't they?
Oh, yeah. Early reports, like one in a Pasadena paper, really painted him as suspicious. They highlighted him asking, when are the detectives going to see me? Making it sound like he knew more than he was letting on.
But the book pushes back on that timing.
It does. It clarifies he asked that after he was arrested, replying to something an officer said. Completely changes the context. Makes it sound less like guilt, more like confusion, maybe?
The paper also mentioned things like a rip in his pants, signs of a struggle in the cottage.
Right, implying it happened during the murders. But again, the book says no, those happened during his arrest. The struggle was with the officers taking him into custody.
So what was Garrettson's story?
He said he'd stayed up late writing letters, listening to a stereo, didn't get to sleep until dawn, claimed he heard absolutely nothing unusual.
Nothing. despite everything that happened.
That's what he said.
Hmm?
He did admit he was scared, though, because he noticed the doorknob on his cottage door was turned down and his phone line was dead.
Investigators must have found that hard to believe, hearing nothing.
They definitely did, especially since neighbors, people living much farther away from the main house, reported hearing gunshots, maybe screams during the night. He was also apparently a bit evasive, about whether he'd gone into the backyard when he let his dogs out. Even though he couldn't see the main house from there, maybe he could have heard something. That was the suspicion.
So for weeks, the investigation, it felt like it was just spinning its wheels, right? Following dead ends.
Totally. They looked into all sorts of things. There was this rumor about the mafia being involved in the LaBianca murders, the second set of killings the next night.
Because of Lino LaBianca's business dealings?
Yeah, something about his finances or associates. They checked out his business partners, even the company where he bought a speedboat. But nothing. No connection back to the murders.
And there were problems with the initial evidence handling, too.
There were. The book mentions that the tech, Granado, apparently overlooked some blood spots at Cielo Drive. And worse, about 21 blood samples weren't properly subtyped early on.
What does that mean, not subtyped?
It means they couldn't link them back to specific victims or exclude potential suspects later. It really caused headaches down the line when they were trying to piece together exactly what happened and who was where.
So forensic dead ends, too. Bullets didn't match.
Right. They found some bullets later at Span Ranch, where the family lived, but ballistics tests showed they didn't match the ones from Cielo Drive. And tests on wire cutters found were inconclusive in court. Lots of potential links just didn't materialize early on.
This is where things start to shift, though.
Yeah.
When people involved begin to talk. And Susan Atkins seems absolutely central here.
Oh, completely pivotal. She was already in custody, right, on unrelated charges, and she just started talking.
To other inmates.
Yeah. First to a woman named Virginia Graham, then another named Ronnie Howard. She talked about a lot of stuff, but eventually she started mentioning this Charlie she met in San Francisco and how she just did whatever he told her to.
The way the book describes her talking about the murders,
Yeah.
it's profoundly disturbing. So casual, just like it was a perfectly natural thing to do every day of the week. That kind of matter-of-fact tone.
It's chilling, isn't it? The book suggests it really speaks to the level of indoctrination, this complete surrender to Manson's worldview, his justifications.
And her admissions were damning.
Absolutely crucial. She flat out said she was there, we did it. She linked the LaBianca murders directly to Tate, asking Ronnie Howard, you know the other two, the next night, and adding, but that's part of the plan.
Even if Ronnie's memory was a bit fuzzy on the exact number of people involved.
Right, there were some inconsistencies there. But Ronnie did recall specific details that Virginia Graham hadn't mentioned at first. Things like Charlie having a gun, the girls carrying knives, Charlie cutting the wires himself, shooting the boy in the car, Stephen Parent, and waking up the man on the couch, Frykowski.
And Atkins apparently told Virginia the victims had to be important people, so the whole world would notice.
That's what was reported, yeah.
Make a statement.
Then there's Linda Kasabian. The book paints quite a picture of her. Small, long brown hair, looked a bit like Mia Farrow.
Yeah, and she comes across as quiet, maybe easily influenced, but with a sort of inner fatalism, the book calls it.
She had a tough background, right? Broken home, bad marriages.
Exactly. Had a daughter, was pregnant again when she showed up at Spahn Ranch. She described feeling like a little blind girl in the forest, just taking the first path she found.
And her first meeting with Manson. That sounds pretty revealing about his techniques. Oh, definitely. Classic cult leader stuff. She felt like she was on trial. He touched her legs, seemed pleased. Then, before anything intimate happened, he tells her she has a father hang-up.
Which startled her.
Totally startled her, because she really disliked her stepfather. It made her feel like he could just see inside her. That immediate, intense connection, that feeling of being understood. That's powerful manipulation.
And her testimony about the Tate night? That became the backbone of the prosecution's case, didn't it?
Absolutely critical. She laid it all out, getting lost on the way there. Tex Watson using wire cutters on the phone lines.
They didn't go through the main gate.
No, they were worried about an alarm, so they climbed over the fence where it was lower, threw some brush on a steep incline, then hid in the bushes.
And that's when Stephen Parent drove up.
Yes. Linda described Tex stepping out, yelling, halt, Parent just pleading, please don't hurt me, I won't say anything.
But Tex shot him anyway.
4 times, according to Linda. And the book highlights this really powerful moment in her testimony, describing seeing Parent's body slumped in the car. She initially referred to it as The thing I saw in the car.
The thing.
Yeah. And when the prosecutor asked her to clarify if that thing was a human being, and she confirmed it was, the book says you could hear the jury gasp, just this audible shock in the courtroom.
Inside the house.
Yeah.
The horror just continued. People pleading for their lives.
And Texas' response, just cold. You are all going to die. No negotiation, no hesitation. Abigail Folger apparently offered them money, $72, credit cards, anything. Didn't matter.
Linda tried to stop it from outside.
She testified that she did. She called out to Susan Atkins, Sadie, that was her nickname. Sadie, please make it stop. People are coming. Which wasn't true, she said later. She just wanted it to end.
And Susan's reply.
According to Linda. Just brutal. It's too late.
God. And Linda saw more from outside.
She described seeing Abigail Folger managing to run out onto the lawn, but Patricia Krenwinkel, Katie, was chasing her, knife raised, and she saw Tex repeatedly stabbing Wojtek Frykowski out on the lawn after he'd stumbled out of the house, too.
The book also mentions another attempted murder that same night, ordered by Manson.
Yeah, a failed attempt. They went to an actor's apartment. Linda was supposed to knock. When he opened the door, Sadie and Clem Grogan were meant to rush in. Linda's job. Slit his throat. Clem's. Shoot him.
Unbelievable orders.
And Manson's instruction was chillingly practical. If anything goes wrong, just hang it up. Don't do it. Just matter of fact about murder. Luckily, that attempt didn't happen. Linda apparently knocked on the wrong door.
So with all this horror, what was the why? What was driving it? The book gets into this central bizarre motive, doesn't it? Helter Skelter?
Yeah, that's what investigators ultimately landed on as the core motivation. Testimony from former family members, especially Paul Watkins and Brooks Poston, was absolutely key here.
What was the idea behind Helter Skelter?
Manson was convinced this apocalyptic race war was inevitable, blacks rising up against whites. But he believed he needed to trigger it himself. And somehow, he and his followers would survive it and end up ruling over the chaos.
How did he plan to trigger it?
By committing these gruesome murders and making them look like they were done by black militants. Targeting wealthy white people, pigs in his terminology. The idea was to incite fear and hatred, push society over the edge into this war he envisioned.
He actually thought, according to testimony, that Blackie had no smarts and someone needed to show him how to do it.
That's what was testified, yes.
Yeah.
A deeply racist and arrogant view that he had to kickstart this apocalypse.
And this connects directly to the crime scenes.
Directly. The word pig, written in Sharon Tate's blood on the front door at Cielo Drive.
And at the LaBianca house.
Death to pigs, written in Lena LaBianca's blood. And remember Juan Flynn's testimony? He said he heard Sadie Atkins say, right before they left Spawn Ranch for the LaBianca murders, we're going to get some fucking pigs. It all ties back to Manson's ideology.
There was also a secondary motive mentioned for the Tate murders specifically.
Yeah, revenge, essentially. To put the fear into Terry Melcher, the record producer who lived at the Cielo Drive house previously, Manson felt Melcher hadn't followed through on promises to help his music career.
The book also gives us a glimpse into what life was like in the family at Spawn Ranch.
Yeah.
Manson's control.
It does. Dennis Wilson from the Beach Boys gets drawn in, right? Starts supporting them financially.
Paying for a lot of expenses.
A lot. Wilson apparently joked about paying probably the largest gonorrhea bill in history for the group.
Mm-hmm.
He gave Manson gold records, introduced him to people in the music industry like Melcher and Rudy Altobelli, who owned the Cielo Drive house.
Wilson seemed quite taken with Manson initially.
He said he got along very well with Charlie and the girls, liked the spontaneity, though he admitted Charlie wasn't actually talented musically. But the book makes clear, the other Beach Boys, they did not share his positive view of this scruffy little guru. Not at all.
And Manson's control. It wasn't always shouting orders, was it? It was more subtle.
Much more insidious, yeah. He rarely gave direct commands. It was all suggestions. But for his followers, those suggestions were absolute law. Total obedience.
The book gives examples, right? Like controlling Danny DeCarlo's sex life by withholding favors.
Exactly. Or that really extreme request he made of Sadie Susan Atkins to get him half a coconut, even if she had to go all the way to Rio de Janeiro for it. It seems absurd, but...
What does that pattern tell you about his leadership style?
It shows how he systematically broke down their individual will, their sense of reality, demanding the impossible, controlling basic desires. It just cemented his power, made his word the only thing that mattered.
There's that really sad quote from Diane Lake, one of the younger girls.
Oh, yeah, that the girls had poured all their love into Charlie and they just couldn't love anyone else anymore, not even their own parents, just cut off from everything but him.
So even after people like Atkins and Kasabian started talking, Building a solid court case wasn't easy.
Not at all. You had the initial misdirection towards Garretson, the evidence issues we talked about, but even getting that informant testimony ready for trial was a huge challenge.
People were scared to testify.
Terribly scared. Juan Flynn, for example, was so nervous about retaliation, he actually asked the investigators if they could lock him up for protection until it was time for him to take the stand.
And Linda Kasabian. Her decision to cooperate was massive, but it wasn't simple for her either.
No, she actually waived extradition back to California against her first lawyer's advice. She said later that talking about it, testifying, was the only way she felt she could start emerging from the darkness. That was her motivation, despite the huge personal risk.
But her testimony, especially about the second night, the LaBianca murders, was harder to back up.
It was. Investigators tried really hard to find corroborating witnesses, maybe drivers who picked up hitchhikers matching their description that night, but they couldn't find anyone who could definitively place the group traveling to the LaBianca house, as Linda described.
And the defense would use that later.
Oh, yeah. They hammered on the lack of external corroboration for parts of her story. Plus, those forensic issues persisted. The bullets, the wire cutters, nothing gave the prosecution that slam-dunk physical evidence link they wanted.
And the trial itself. It took place in this atmosphere of just intense fear, right?
Yeah.
Across Southern California.
Absolutely palpable fear. The book describes people being terrified, friendships ending overnight, social events canceled. Even months later, in March 1970, reports of people in wealthy areas jumping at shadows, calling the police if a branch fell off a tree. Real paranoia.
The prosecution's case really hung on that detailed testimony from the former members.
It did, and a lot of the crucial details came out through careful questioning by the prosecutor, Vincent Bugliosi, details the witnesses hadn't necessarily volunteered to the police initially.
Which led to defense complaints.
Yeah, the defense accused Bugliosi of basically framing the whole case, suggesting he was feeding lines or shaping the narrative through his witnesses rather than just eliciting facts.
What were the main defense strategies?
They tried a few things. One was definitely trying to shift the blame, often pointing the finger at Tex Watson as the main driver, the one truly out of control.
But Watson's appearance in court kind of undercut that.
It did. By the time he went on trial, he was clean cut, short hair, wearing a blazer. Looked like a typical college kid, as the book puts it. It didn't quite match the image of a wild, Manson-crazed killer they were sometimes trying to paint, especially compared to those infamous earlier mugshots.
They also tried psychiatric defenses, LSD.
Yeah, diminished capacity due to heavy LSD use and Manson's psychological dominance. The argument was they weren't fully responsible for their actions.
But the prosecution argued they were still willing participants.
Exactly. Bugliosi argued that yes, they were subservient, but they consciously, willingly participated in the brutality. They weren't just robots.
And the courtroom itself sounds like it was often chaotic.
Bizarre and disruptive, definitely. The defendants, especially the women, would sometimes act out, make crucifixion poses, get into scuffles with the deputies. Total circus at times.
Manson testified too, but not in front of the jury.
Right. He gave testimony outside their presence, claimed complete innocence. I have killed no one, and I have ordered no one to be killed. But then he'd add things like maybe he'd implied things to people. Very calculated, denying direct orders while hinting at his influence.
Any standout moments from the trial mentioned in the book?
Oh, yeah. There's Juan Flynn snapping back at defense attorney Irving Kunnerik, calling him a big catfish, which got court adjourned for the day.
Okay.
And in Tex Watson's separate trial, the judge, Judge Alexander, apparently showed noticeable bias towards the defense, making faces at prosecution witnesses, even jumping in to cross-examine them himself in front of the jury. Highly unusual.
There are also big legal fights about whether the defendants could testify against their lawyer's advice.
Huge arguments. Judge Older eventually ruled that the defendants' right to testify trumped everything else, even their lawyer's strategy, which led to that famous moment where one defense attorney basically said he refused to push a client out the window by letting them testify when he thought it would doom them.
And in the end, the penalty phase. The prosecution pushed hard for the death penalty.
They did. Bugliosi argued the sheer savage nature of the crimes demanded it. He specifically countered arguments trying to just lump the women in with Manson or comparing them to historical figures like Hitler. He insisted the jury had to look at what each individual defendant did during the murders, their specific actions.
Looking beyond the trial, what about the aftermath? The book touches on where some people ended up. Roman Polanski, for instance.
Yeah, he obviously continued his life, his filmmaking career. Some critics noted disturbing echoes or themes in his later films related to the murders. The book mentions he even reportedly moved back near Cielo Drive for a time.
And the reward money for the information.
It got distributed. Ronnie Howard and Virginia Graham, the two inmates Susan Atkins confided in, they each got $12,000. And Stephen Weiss, the kid who found the gun, the main murder weapon, he got $1,000.
What about the family members who testified? What happened to them? It's quite a contrast, isn't it?
A stark contrast. Linda Kasabian, she eventually got immunity, went on to live under an assumed name somewhere in the Pacific Southwest. Lived a quiet life, apparently. Raised your kids, involved in the PTA. Just normal.
And Barbara Hoyt, another witness?
She became a registered nurse up in the Northwest. Lived an active life, camping, fishing, painting, volleyball. Really turned things around.
Paul Watkins, the one who explained Helter Skelter.
Sadly, he died relatively young from leukemia in 1990. But before that, she'd settled down in Tacoma, California, became like the unofficial mayor, founded the Chamber of Commerce there. He mined rocks, but also lectured widely about cults, about substance abuse, trying to use his experience for something positive.
Which is just worlds away from Manson himself in prison.
Completely. Manson racked up dozens and dozens of disciplinary write-ups over the decades. Periods of quiet, then becoming disruptive again. Never really changed.
Though Clem Grogan, who seemed really unstable at the time, he apparently changed in prison.
Yeah, the book mentions reports of him undergoing a remarkable transformation. He was only 18 when he was involved in the Shorty Shea murder. In prison, he reportedly became quite thoughtful, sensitive, good at painting and music. Quite a turnaround, if true.
The book also brings up possible links between Manson's ideas and the Process Church.
It does explore that, notes some shared concepts, particularly around fear and this kind of dualistic view of Christ and Satan returning. It's speculative, but interesting.
And finally, that unsolved murder at Spawn Ranch. Shorty Shea. No, it was Donald Shorty Shea whose murder they were convicted of later, but there's another guy, right? Waltz.
Right, the Waltz murder, still officially unsolved. But Danny DiCarlo, who knew the family dynamics well, told investigators he strongly believed Manson was responsible. Said something like, "You don't find many people who just blow someone's head off for no reason like that," but it was never proven in court.
So digging into a book like this, it really leaves you with some heavy takeaways, doesn't it?
Absolutely. You see the incredible, painstaking work that goes into an investigation this complex. You get these deeply unsettling insights into Manson's control, the bizarre logic of Helter Skelter.
And you see the fear, but also maybe the bravery or just the desperation of those former followers who eventually came forward. Their testimony was everything.
It really underscores why these detailed accounts are so valuable for understanding major historical events, even really dark ones, and the need to keep thinking critically when you encounter information that's this disturbing or just overwhelming.
Yeah, and for more reflection on challenging books like this one, don't forget to check out Mindful Moments over on YouTube. That AI analysis can offer another perspective. And, of course, to explore our other podcasts, too.
Definitely.
So if this deep dive resonated with you, please subscribe so you catch the next one. Maybe share it with someone else who appreciates this kind of detailed exploration.
And if you're interested in the book itself, check the show notes for a link. Purchasing through it helps support the author's work.
And above all, just keep thinking critically.
Yeah.
Keep questioning the world around you.
Because this book, it really does leave you thinking about, the power of influence, the nature of belief, how people who seem ordinary can get swept up in something so incredibly dark. The shadow these events still cast, really.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it? Just how susceptible are we as individuals, as a society, to charismatic figures peddling dangerous ideas? It's a question that definitely sticks with you long after you finish reading.